I'm going to kick it off with my first question for you, Nate. And this is one that's been talked about all off season, going back to, doing mock drafts all the way back when. It seems like it was yesterday and a year ago at the same time. In your opinion, do you think Brandon Beane has done enough this offseason to surround Josh Allen with the weapons that he needed?
So my philosophy for the last 2 seasons, and probably should have been longer than that, is to build around Josh Allen. And I think this was the first offseason where Brandon Beane finally took that seriously. Because if you think about the season before that, the big acquisition was Von Miller. Before that, I mean, it just feels like it's mostly, on the defensive side, minus the Stephon Diggs trade, right? Like, I mean, he ignored the offensive line for, especially the interior of the offensive line, for so long. And then as soon as an injury happened, to Mitch Morris or Ryan Bates or whatever, or whoever they have as a revolving door at left guard at the time, it was a huge issue to protecting Josh Allen. I mean, everyone remembers the play against the Bengals where Roger Saffold barely got up from his stance at the snap, and I think it was Geno Atkins or someone just ran right to Josh Allen. And luckily, Josh Allen is such a good athlete, he scrambled out to his right, and he somehow threw it away or made a pass or whatever. This offseason, they made a concerted effort, not only in free agency, but also the draft, to surround Josh Allen with protectional pieces and also some weapons. If you think about the offseason, this is the deepest the Bills have ever been at guard and a little bit at center as well, because, they signed Connor McGovern in the offseason. That was their big free agent acquisition. So now they have a left guard that's better than Roger Saffold, we hope. And then they signed David Edwards, who's a starting caliber guard as well. So now all of a sudden they added depth, which they've never truly had. Ike Butker is back from injury. And then, in the second round of the draft, which, I mean, I don't know if anyone really expected this to happen, because Brandon Beane has never drafted a guard before the 5th round or 6th round. He's only drafted a tackle as high as the 2nd round. That was Cody Ford, which didn't end up being a tackle or a guard in the end. But Spencer Brown was a 3rd round pick, and he was a right tackle. So I'm like, there's no way. And I remember seeing Osiris Torrance mocked to the Bills. He's the most mocked player to the Buffalo Bills at 27. And I'm like, they're not going to take a guard that early. He just doesn't do that. And sure enough, he's around in round 2. And the reason why I didn't think he was going to happen, either they were going to draft him, is because he doesn't play tackle also. I mean, they love versatility and they love guys that can play more than one position. And, Osiris Torrance is strictly a right guard. He's good at what he does, but he is strictly a right guard. So the fact that they added him along with the assets that they added in free agency, I was like, okay, now they're serious. Now what happens if Mitch Morris goes down, God forbid, another concussion or something more serious? They can move Ryan Bates to center, which is not ideal, but it's a lot better than it was before last year, because now you're moving Ryan Bates to center. He's a lesser center than Mitch Morris, and now you have a terrible right guard for Ryan Bates. You're in trouble. Now, let's say Mitch Morris does go down. Ryan Bates swings. Ryan Bates might not even start, by the way. That's how good this offensive line could potentially be, we're hoping. So I love that about it. I was listening to Joe Marino's podcast on the Locked On Bills, and what's nice about Joe is he's analytical, but he's also a draft guru. So when he was talking, wide receivers in this draft, I'm looking at Jordan Addison, Zay Flowers, all those guys that were mocked top 4 or 5 wide receivers. And someone asked him, where would you have Khalil Shakir in this year's draft? And luckily, Joe does this cool thing where he has the same grade from year to year, so he can compare drafts from 4 years ago to this draft. And he said he had Khalil Shakir as his 7th ranked wide receiver if he was coming out in this draft. So the Bills don't like starting rookies, but I love the fact that Khalil Shakir has a chance to emerge in some way, shape, or form. And I haven't even started to talk about Dalton Kincaid. They added him in the 1st round. They traded up for him. So you would at least hope that they have a plan to use him the way he does. And I love the fact that Brandon Beane was like, okay, you're going to take away the best wide receivers. Well, I'm going to get the best pass catcher of the entire draft. And I don't know if you thought this, Justin. The more I was at the end of the season, the Bills were struggling offensively all year. It felt like after the first 3 or 4 games or so. And I think one of the major reasons, because if you look at the roster, it's not that much different from 2021 to 2022. The big changes were Brian Daboll and Emmanuel Sanders left. And then you have Ken Dorsey coming in, but you didn't have Cole Beasley as that safety blanket underneath in the slot. So I think Dalton Kincaid fits in that position. Maybe he switches in a role with Khalil Shakir as well. Like they switch it up, they rotate guys in. I don't know. I know this is a long answer for your question, but I think that this is the most he's ever done for Josh Allen, and I didn't expect it because he's never done it, and I'm so happy that he did because I feel much more confident in the offense. Now, I will say on the flip side of that, I don't know how you feel about this, but I think Ken Dorsey doesn't really have any excuses this season. Like last season was, his first season, sure. Like I think he's on the hot seat. And I say that because not like he's done anything wrong, but like if he doesn't get it together this season, I don't think they keep him. Because I don't know if you remember before Josh Allen came around, they had Rick Dennison as their offensive coordinator in Sean McDermott's first season. And I remember Joe Biscaglia writing about Rick Dennison and being like, is this the guy you want to lead your franchise quarterback when you know you're going to draft one this offseason? And they didn't. They canned him, and then they brought in Brian Daboll. So I'm excited for it. I think Ken Dorsey doesn't have any more excuses, and I'm looking forward to seeing what they can do. And I think Brandon Beane did a great job.
Yeah, I the easy version of this is I agree with like 99% of everything you said there, and it does lead into one of my other talking points.
Well, you're a smart person, Justin. That's probably part
yeah, like mine's. Yeah, one of my questions was kind of asking the confidence level in Dorsey, and I'll kind of touch on both of these myself. Yeah, I was really excited to see what they did throughout this offseason on the offensive side of the ball, and to me, it wasn't just quality additions like you talked about. It was also quantity. So there's not as much this year of kind of betting on people taking steps like we saw last year, right? Like thrusting Gabe Davis into the number 2 role, not really having a plan to replace Beasley other than, McKenzie was good in spot duty. Let's just, roll him out there. And yes, I will say they did add Jamison Crowder, and we never really got to see that play out. Probably was factoring in as more of that role than McKenzie. But just at the wide receiver position, even taking Dalton Kincaid out of the mix, that number 2/3, I guess kind of 2 through 4 is just a lot of competition there. And I kind of have this opinion of the receiver room, including Dalton Kincaid, of it kind of being like positionless basketball, where you have Diggs being like the clear-cut number 1, and then kind of 2 through 5 on the depth chart isn't really going to matter so much as like, well, this is the number 2. He's supposed to get this many catches. I think with the skill sets that they're able to blend in there, you have fast guys, you have big guys, you have big fast guys that run in a straight line. They're going to be able to be so much more matchup specific and game plan specific, and have pivots that they can move to throughout the game. So I think that's really going to open up their options, free up Diggs a little bit more, because you have to worry about the guy just straight up beating you with speed down the field. I know Gabe Davis is a great deep ball target, but he's not getting 5 yards of separation like these 4-3 guys can get, right? So yeah, I would agree. It kind of puts Dorsey in a situation where it's no excuses. And my hot take on this one is kind of in the same vein of what we were talking about with Daboll for so long. I think either way, at the end of this season, Ken Dorsey's not going to be here anymore. There's going to be head coaching positions available. We saw it as Bills fans, when the offense kind of wasn't that well-oiled machine that we'd gotten used to. It had its struggles down the stretch. But when you look at the overall season numbers, I think we're still like the number 4 overall offense in the league. So if you're looking at a guy who, like, in his rookie struggles as a first-time offensive coordinator, has the 4th overall offense, and then follows it up with kind of what it sounds like both you and I are expecting this year, he's going to be one of those big names that's out there. Everybody's looking for this, next offensive mind and all that. Or, with all these tools at his disposal, he isn't finding a way to get it done, and they have to make the decision to move on to somebody else. So I think by the time we're talking, 2025 season, I don't expect Ken Dorsey to be in the plans at that point.
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't think about him moving on. I mean, you were talking about hot takes. I kind of expect Josh Allen to have one of his best seasons statistically because of that. We didn't even mention Deontay Hardy. We didn't mention Trent Sherfield. We didn't mention James Cook being factored in. We didn't mention Nyheim Hines. Like, there's weapons. Like, I love what you said about positionless basketball, because you could easily sub in any of those guys. Like, you start a formation with 2 running backs, and all of a sudden, James Cook or Nyheim Hines, like, all of a sudden one of them splits out, right? And then the next position you have, you take James Cook out, and then you sub in Deontay Hardy. Okay, like, now then he moves to the backfield. Like, there's so much, that he has at his disposal that, and it's hard to argue with anything you just said, because it's either going to go, great, and he gets a new head coaching gig, because like you said, I mean, it only took Dable, was it 3 years or was it 2 years? No, I think it was 3 years.
It was 3 years, but we were all expecting it after 2, right?
Yeah, he was getting interviews after 2, right? He just didn't land any of them.
Right.
But the 3rd year, he was getting multiple. Okay, yeah, and he was getting offers. Of course, that was after the 13 seconds game, like, and the Bills' offense was on fire. But yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. It's just. And you think about this roster, and I know a lot of Bills. One of the things that we're going to talk about on our next episode, Monday morning, is this hangover that it feels like the Bills fan base is still kind of having since last season's disappointment. But I'd argue, we're kind of alluding to it. But I think that the Bills have a better roster, have at least as good of a roster, if not better, all the way around in every single position, except middle linebacker. And middle linebacker, we're not necessarily sure that's a step down. We don't know what they're going to throw at us yet. But I'd argue that, like, overall, we're better. And we were a 13-3 team last season. So give Dorsey another year. It's not his first year as an OC. Like, all these things we just mentioned, the additions, Von Miller coming back, Micah Hyde coming back. There's a lot of things to be excited about as a Bills fan.